Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We will wait for a few more seconds for more people to join, and then we will get started, okay? All right, so let's get started. So, warm greetings to everyone, and welcome to Mass Analytics' second webinar of the year, a dive into the secrets of marketing budget optimization in MMM. I am your host today. My name is Melek. I am a business development specialist here at Mass Analytics. Our speaker for today's webinar is Dr. Ramla Jarrar, co-founder and CEO of Mass Analytics. She holds a PhD in quantitative methods from HEC Montréal and has over 17 years of experience in marketing mix modeling, predictive analytics, budget optimization, and marketing strategy. So in this webinar, we will be exploring the ins and outs of the optimization process, and we're going to share with you practical tips to achieve actionable and robust optimization. Now, before leaving you with our speaker, I would like to remind you to ask your questions in the Q&A box to your right, and we will be going over them later on in our Q&A session at the end of our webinar. Now, without further ado, I leave you with our speaker, Dr. Ramla Jarrar, and the floor is yours, Ramla.
Much, Malek, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to Mass Analytics webinar, and where we will try to give you more tips when it comes to optimization. So what we have prepared for today is like 4-section presentation. We will start by emphasizing the importance of optimization in the marketing mix modeling workflow in general. Then we will try to analyze what goes behind the scenes when it comes to optimization. And we will share then with you our best practices when it comes to running sound optimization. And we will end up this webinar with final tips that we have dug from our own experience running marketing mix models and optimization. And as Malek pointed out, the last part of this webinar will be dedicated for your questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Now, why optimization is important in the marketing mix modeling workflow? So first thing first, we know that whenever we run a marketing mix model project, there are 3 components that are generally part of this project. There is the first part, which is the measurement, where we try to understand the sales drivers of the brand and try to also measure the return on investment of every single channel and disentangle the impact of each media and marketing investment that our client and the brand that we are working for has invested in. Then, using that measurement framework, we'll then propose the optimal budget allocation to the client in order to maximize profit, maximize revenue, and so forth. The third part, which can run in parallel with the optimization, is the forecasting, which basically means that we try to forecast the sales that will be achieved if we follow the course of certain investment plans. And generally, those investment plans are provided by the brand or by the client, and we try to measure the outcome, the sales outcome, if we ever apply these tactical plans. So the reason for which marketing mix modeling is important, and more importantly, optimization is important, is that generally your client, whether it's your internal client if you are working brand side, or if it's your external client if you are working agency side, the most important part that your client would be waiting for is actually that optimization, because that's where you put your results into action. That's where you tell the story of your modeling to your client. So believe me, in the whole project, the part that all your clients will be waiting for is that optimization part, where you need to show them how you can turn your results, your numbers, your coefficients, your number crunching into a sound story that could be then used by your client, implemented, and benefit from it in terms of improving the profit, improving the revenue, and optimizing the budget. In terms of what goes behind the scenes, I would like to clarify some concepts that I hear a lot. Sometimes I hear them within agency, sometimes I hear them within the client. But I think it's very, very important to put dots on the i's, the way we say it in English, and to cross the t's by giving each concept its right definition. So I will first start by the backbone of any optimization exercise, which is what you call the DR curve or the diminishing return curve. So let's try to understand what that DR curve says. So here you have two axes. You have the spend axis and you have the revenue axis. And what this says is that you have an ascending relationship between your spend and your revenue. So as you increase your spend, your revenue also increases. However, what happens is that your marginal return decreases as you go. For example, when we are at that level of spend, the marginal return we obtain if we invest what you see in the arrow, in the green arrow, is that much. However, if I am at a bigger spend, so I am here and I invest the same incremental spend, which is, so if you see that the size of the green arrow is exactly the same as this one, but what happens is that the marginal ROI or the marginal return at that point is much smaller than what you see here. And that's exactly the concept that these diminishing return curves try to tell. I'm so sorry about some of the layout of the slides because we had problems with the conversion into the platform, but the slide that we'll be sending at the end of the webinar will be sorted out when it comes to these conversion problems. So this is the story behind your diminishing return curve. So it's a descending curve. As you move down the curve, you see that your marginal return decreases until it reaches also almost zero. And when it reaches almost zero, that's where we say that we reach complete saturation. What we mean by complete saturation is that no matter how much more you will be investing in this channel, you are in a way wasting your money, because that investment at that level in time wouldn't generate any additional revenue. And that's where it's wiser to move to another channel in order to increase your revenue. And the whole of the optimization exercise is basically based or founded on the concept of diminishing returns. The second concept that I would like to clarify in this presentation is the relationship between ROI and contribution, because this is another thing that generally I hear a lot of confusion on in the industry. So first, we need to understand that there is a trade-off between contribution and ROI. As you increase your media spend, you are obviously increasing your contribution, because we said that it's an ascending curve. But because of the diminishing returns that we have described earlier on, that's why when you look at the relationship between your media spend and ROI, you discover that your diminishing return, your ROI curve is descending, meaning that as you increase your spend, naturally your ROI will decrease. So a decrease in ROI doesn't mean that you are not bringing contribution, you are not bringing revenue to the brand. It just means that you are bringing less and less over time, and that's why your ROI curve will be decreasing. Now, are these curves static? No, by no means, they're not static, and these curves can change. Let me give you some examples where we can see changes in these curves. For example, if you change the way you execute your campaign, for example, you change your creative, you change your channel mix, your day part mix, the objective of the campaign, or even the format of the campaign, what we can see from one project to the other, or from one campaign to the other, we can see that sometimes if we see that we are deploying a better strategy, a better creative, a better channel mix, we can see that actually your contribution for the same spend has increased. So this is, for example, the campaign measurement in the initial project. Then you did another project where you have measured another campaign. The campaign has been better in terms of execution. For the same spend, you can realize a better contribution. And when you look at your ROI, this will also translate into a better ROI. For the same spend, because you have changed the way you have executed your campaign, that has generated a higher ROI. So sometimes when you see that your ROI has changed from one period to the other, even if you have increased your spend, that could be an indication that one element of the execution of the campaign has changed, and that was the source of the ROI improvement. So that's the second concept that I wanted to introduce in the context of marketing mix modeling and the usage of optimization. The third concept that I would like to introduce here is that ROI is not the only indicator that will tell you where to optimize your budget. Sometimes when you show your clients, either internally or externally, the ROI figures, and you point to the channels that have the highest ROI, some of your clients would say, then in that context, I will be spending my money in the channel that has the highest ROI. That is not always true, because your optimization does not only depend on where you are in your ROI curve, it really depends on how saturated is the channel at that point in time. Let's look at this curve where we have the search diminishing return curve. We see here that if we invest $200,000, we generate $600,000 in revenue. If we double our spend, taking it from $200,000 to $400,000, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be doubling my revenue. I will only have $840,000 in revenue instead of $1,200,000, and that's because we have built into that curve diminishing returns. Now let's take the example of two channels, because generally when we perform optimization, we need to decide how to optimize budget between at least two channels. So in this context, I have done my marketing mix model, and these are the ROI that I have reported to my client. I spent $300,000 on television. I get $800,000 in terms of sales. ROI is simple. You take your sales, divide by the spend, and you obtain your ROI of 2.67. Now let's look at the search channel. We spent $300,000, the same as TV, and that has generated $725,000 in revenue. To compute the ROI, very simple. Take the sales, divided by the spend, and you obtain an ROI for 2.42. Sometimes people would look at these results and say, you know what? Based on this, I'm going to spend more money on television because television has a high ROI. What I'm going to prove here is that it's not the case. Because what we see here is that TV, which is the blue curve, is highly saturated, where search is not that highly saturated when you compare to television. So what we are going to do next is to take $50,000 from the TV spend. Because I took out $50,000 from the $300,000 that I used to invest in television, my budget will drop to $250,000, and my sales obviously will drop. If you remember, I had sales of $800,000, and these will drop to $775,000. So they dropped by $25K, and the ROI became higher. Remember, we said that when you drop your TV spend, automatically your ROI will get higher. This is expected. Now that $50,000 that we took out of television, we're going to invest it on search. So my spend on search will rise from $300,000 to $350,000, 50K more, and that will generate 50K more in revenue. So in other terms, total budget stayed the same, $600,000. Instead of spending it 50-50 TV and search, I spent $250,000 on television, 350 on search, same budget, $600,000. But the revenue that I have generated is actually much higher than before, 25K exactly higher than before, because I have now generated $1,550,000 in revenue as opposed to 1,525K that I had earlier on. So by just shifting budget from one saturated channel that is television in this context to a less saturated channel that is search in this context, I was capable of improving my revenue. And this illustration, I have used it to showcase to you that having a higher ROI doesn't necessarily mean that you need to invest more money on that channel. So these were the three concepts that I wanted to clarify to you in the context of optimization. First, the importance of the diminishing return curve. Second, the relationship between contribution and ROI. Third, ROI is not the only indicator that needs to be taken into consideration in the context of optimization. But let's discover in a step-by-step process how optimization works. So to again illustrate this, I took a simple example. which is we have three channels here: TV, search, and display. So how are we going to optimize the 50K? So in the problem I have, my client has $50,000 to spend across three channels: TV, radio, and display. TV, search, and display. And what the client wants to do is to decide how much to allocate to television, how much to allocate to search, and how much to allocate to display. So the first step is to derive my diminishing return curves. From where we derive them, as simple as the model. So when you run your marketing mix model, then you can easily derive your diminishing return curves. So these curves, in other terms, are the output of your modeling. Now, the step that optimization will follow is the following. So if I have 50K, I'm going to split these 50Ks into increments. For example, 10, 20, 20, or 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. It's up to you, depending on the algorithm. There are different ways of splitting it. But for the sake of this simple exercise, we will split it into three chunks. First chunk is, I think, 10K. Second one is 20K. And the third one is 20K. And what we're going to then do is that we're going to use the diminishing return curves to decide for the first chunk of money where it's best to invest it. So let's start. So here, my first chunk is the first 10K. So the question I'm asking myself here, I have 10K to invest out of the 50K. Where should I invest it? Should I invest it in display? So if I do so, my display revenue will be the size of the orange arrow. If I invest that 10K on search, then the revenue that will be generated will be the size of the search arrow. If I decide to invest that 10K on television, then my revenue will amount to what you can see in green, which is the TV arrow. Then it's easy because TV is generating the highest revenue in this context. Then I'm going to spend my first 10K on television. So the first 10K will be invested in television. Next step. So now that I have invested 10K on television, I have invested 0 penny on search and 0 penny in display. I have a remaining budget of 40K. Okay, so what I'm going to ask myself now, how am I going to allocate the next 40K? Again, I'm going to take a chunk of those 40K. I'm going to take 20K and decide where best to invest them. So what we will be doing next is deciding on where to invest the next 20K. Now, if I invest 20K on display, I will get this, the orange arrow. If I invest the 20K on search, then I will get the amount that is displayed in the blue arrow. Now, if I invest the 20K on television, I shouldn't be counting from here because on television, I have already invested 10K. So an extra 20K will be this because I already invested in the first iteration 10K. So if I invest an additional 20K, the marginal returns of television will be only that much. And we can clearly see that in this context, the best channel to invest in is search. So at the end of this iteration, what I will have is the following. Invested TV, 10K from the first iteration. Iteration 2, I have invested 20K on search, still nothing on display. So 30K in total out of the 50 went to TV 10 and search 20K. Now, I want to make a decision on the remaining budget, which is now 20K. Remember, I had 50 to start with, allocated 10 television, 20 to search, and now I have 20K left. We will do the same drill. I have an additional 20K. Where am I going to invest them? Because I've never invested on display, a 20K will continue to give me that amount of that you see in the orange arrow. Now, on search, I have already invested 20K. So an additional 20K will give me this marginal returns. On television, I have already invested in the first iteration 10K. So if I invest a further 20K, I will get this amount that is exhibited with the green arrow. Obviously here, what we can see is that the highest arrow is actually the TV. So what we will decide to do is to invest the next 20K on the third iteration on television. Remember, iteration 1, we had already 10 on television. Iteration 3, I'm going to add a 20K to television. So I'll be spending out of the 50K, 30K in television. In iteration 2, we have spent 20K on search, and that would be the optimal allocation of my budget of 50K. 30 on television, 20 on search, and nothing on display, because display, when you look at its relative diminishing returns when it comes to TV and search, it always comes at the third place. So this is a simplistic way to showcase to you that it's actually the incremental revenue that is accounted for at each stage of your optimization. Moving on, what I wanted to share next with you is our best practices that we really recommend you to use if you want to really achieve a sound optimization. And I have devised here a process that contains 5 steps that I really advise you to contemplate whenever you had and apply whenever you have, whenever you are in front of an optimization exercise. The first step is to consider your media carryover. The second one is to account for media saturation. The third one is to choose a realistic subset of diminishing return curves. The fourth one is to use the auto modeler or any automated way to choose the best diminishing return curve out of all those that you have generated in step 3, and then you run out and then you run your optimization. Let's look into the details of every single step. The first two, 1 and 2, are very important because the number of times I have seen models where analysts use raw GRPs, raw impressions, raw clicks, raw spend in their data without any transformation is numerous. And I think that this is not correct because there are things that are inherent to the marketing, the consumer behavior and the way they digest media that should be accounted for in our modeling. So we shouldn't really have any of our media variables not transformed. We should account first for the carryover effect and second for the saturation effect. Let's focus on the first part, which is the carryover effect. So I'm sure that most of you have heard about something called the ad stock transformation. Sometimes we call the decay function. So here what I have done, so we have the TV GRP that are in red, which is the raw data that I have inherited, that I have got from my client. And what you see in blue and in green are the transformation or the new curves that I have obtained once I have applied the ad stock. What does it mean, ad stock? It simply means that your consumer, when he is exposed to media, he will take that message and say, for example, you are doing a weekly campaign. And so you have sent a message the week 1 and then week 2, week 3. On week 2, your customer will not only be exposed to what he has seen in week 2, but there will be some carryover coming in from week 1 that will top up what he has seen in week 1. And that will build up until you obtain what we call an ad stock, which takes the shape of what you see here in my graph. So the difference between, for example, the curve that you see in blue and the curve that you see in green, that in the curve in blue, we assume that the customer are forgetting 10% of the message week on week. Whereas in the green curve, in the green ad stock, we are assuming that the message is forgotten at a rate of 90%. So, for example, the campaign was not that compelling, the message was not that clear, it did not cut through, and hence people or your customers, your target segment, forgotten a lot of the message. Whereas in the context of the second one, we are assuming that the message was compelling. It really anchored inside the brain and the memory set of your clients, and it was really impactful. And people ended up not forgetting that message. What happens is that in the second context, if we are assuming a 10%, we see that the carryover effect or the effect of advertising remains really in a prolonged period, even when you are not on air anymore or you are not advertising anymore. So, and that's what we mean by carryover effect. What we generally do in a classic marketing mix modeling project is that we would create different or many carryover effects, 10%, 15%, 20%, 30%, and so forth. And then we will test all the carryover effect in order to find out which one mimics the best the size and the shape of your KPI that you are modeling. And the one that really mimics better the shape of your sales variable, once you control for all the other marketing variables, would be the carryover that applies in the very context of your campaign. So that's the very first transformation that I really advise you to do if you want to do your optimization. The second one that is equally important to the carryover is the step 2 of your optimization best practices workbook, which is accounting for saturation using one of these functional forms. Obviously, these, I'm sorry for the equations that are all over the place, but as I mentioned earlier on, we'll send you a clear deck with the right formulas here. So this is a snapshot or a small subset of the diminishing return curves or the functional forms that one could use in the context of applying saturation for your carryover. Here we have the arctangent function, we have the exponential function, we have the add-bud function, and we have many other functions. All of them, that what they will try to do, they will try to give you that nice curvature that we have shown you earlier on when we looked at the diminishing return curves. And here we can have some functions will give you a nice C-shaped curves, and other functional forms will give you the desired S-shaped curve that generally people that work in media like a lot, because it really kind of translates how we want to think our customers behave. So you start by having exponential returns until you reach an inflection point, and then after that you start having your nice decreasing marginal returns. So in the beginning you are spending not enough, you're not cutting through, but then starting from a certain point, that's where you start seeing your nice decreasing marginal returns kicking in. So again, this is a small sample of some of the functional forms that you can apply to your carryover or your add stock variable in order to account for saturation. Note that if you do not use those functional forms, you will always end up with linear relationship between your media variables and your sales, meaning that there's no way that you can apply any optimization, because your add stock or your carryover is a linear transformation, meaning that you are not adding any saturation to your variable by applying an add stock. The functional form that will apply the saturation is actually these functional forms and not the add stock. So please remember, so if you want to optimize your budget, you have to build in your saturation effect in every single add stock you have created or raw variable you have inherited from the project. So this is an example where in the software master, for example, we have these kind of diminishing return curves already built in, and you can click on the one you desire, and then you click on the variable that you want it to be applied to, and then the functional formula will be applied to it, and then you can get your output easily. And this is an example of what you would obtain from applying the exponential curve. So here, for example, again, I have applied many saturation factor, and we see that the smaller the saturation factor, so this is a curve where I have a very small gamma. If I have a small gamma, then the faster our curve reaches saturation. So if you look at the red curve and you compare its saturation to the green curve, you can clearly see that the red curve is much more saturated than the green curve, and the green curve is much more saturated than the blue curve. And what controls the speed at which you reach saturation is actually the gamma parameter that appears into your exponential function. Okay, so this is the second step, which is accounting for saturation. Now, what I really want to talk about, and I touched base on that earlier on, is that actually when you account for saturation, you can choose between C-shaped and S-shaped curves. However, what you need to know about S-shaped and C-shaped curves is the following. The choice between the two really depends on the product and the market you are working on, and also the desire of your client. But let me tell you the following. The C-shaped curves are much easier for optimization because in terms of conversions, they will ensure a much better conversion than when you use S-shaped curves. Because the S-shaped curves, your algorithm can get stuck into that area where you move from the exponential part to the C curve part. However, with the S-shaped curve, you can create what we call optimal execution rates that generally clients like to say, like to see in the presentation, which is a bit harder to see or to compute in the context of the C-shaped curve. My advice is to always consult your client into what shape they are used to. So if they are used to the C-shaped curve, no need to convince them to go for S-shaped curve. However, if they are used to use the S-shaped curve, then we need to go for that because this is what they are used to see, and probably most of their reporting is being done on the S-shaped curve, and it's very important to keep that shape for the continuity of the results and recommendations. So I said earlier on that one of the characteristics that people like to see in the S-shaped curve is what we call the optimal execution rate. Let me explain in a nutshell what it means. So here what I have is three curves. The first one is my normal ROI curve. So this is the S-shaped curve that we talk about. This is your spend, this is your revenue, and you see here that you have your curvature and then you have another curvature after that. From this, I can easily derive my average ROI curve, and I can also derive my marginal ROI curve. So the yellow one is the marginal ROI curve. The blue curve is the ROI curve. And sometimes people get really interested in this range. And this range lays between the maximum marginal ROI and the maximum average ROI. And we tend to say that if we look at one channel at a time, then we would recommend that your optimal spend for that particular channel is between your maximum marginal ROI and your maximum average ROI. Because at this point, you reach your maximum marginal ROI. And once you step out from that zone, your marginal ROI will diminish. However, your maximum marginal ROI is still higher than your average ROI. So if you keep adding this up to your ROI will always be going up until it reaches the maximum average ROI. Starting from that point, you see that your marginal ROI drops below your average ROI. So at this stage here, you will see that your ROI is going to drop, and that's where you decide that it's not at all optimal to invest in that channel. So I think that I know that a lot of people are very keen on that chart, but what my pinch of salt here is that this only works if you want to look at each channel alone. The minute you put that channel alongside other channels and you want to optimize your budget across different channels, it's very important to look at your marginal ROI of that channel and how it does compare to the other marginal ROI in the other channels. Moving on, the third step is choose a realistic subset of diminishing return curves. So as I mentioned earlier on, in this step, what we are doing is the following. We have created many carryover effects. For each carryover, we will be applying different diminishing returns, and we'll end up with perhaps hundreds of curves. My advice is never go into modeling before you look at your diminishing return curves, because what you don't want to go for is curves that are highly saturated or curves that not at all saturated that will proxy a linear curve. Because if your curves are highly saturated, it means that no matter how much money you put on that channel, in any optimization exercise, you will never put any penny on that channel. If you go for curves that are really almost close to linear, your optimization will always tend to put all the money on the channel that has that high slope. So my advice is, when it comes to this part, consult your surrounding, consult your project manager, consult your media agencies, look at your ROI benchmark and your diminishing return benchmark in order to restrict the number of curves you're creating, and please make sure that you use a software that allows you to visualize those curves. Because what you don't want to do is to go to the client have nice ROI figures, nice contribution, but then once you go to the optimization, you discover that your curves are all over the place. They are either highly saturated or not at all saturated, and that happened to me in the past. And believe me, I don't want you to go through the hurdles that I went into in order to correct that mistake. So please make sure that before you even go to the modeling stage, you make sure that you visualize your curves and you make sure that they make sense from a commercial perspective. So that's when it comes to the choice of, or restricting the choice of the optimal or the subset of your curves. Now, with the fourth step of your optimization is basically to choose the optimal curve. And generally what happens that in most softwares you would use some kind of automatic method in order to select the best curve out of all the curves that you have created. Again, typically you would create even sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of curves, because when you vary the carryover effect and you vary at the same time your diminishing returns, then that will create a big set of curves. Obviously, my advice earlier on at stage 3 is to restrict them, to make them commercially viable, but still, you still have to decide out of that small subset that you have created, which one is the best once you control for all the other variables. Here, I advise you to use some kind of genetic algorithm that will help you select the best curves out of all those that you have created, that will help you better mimic the movement of your KPI. So that's your step number 4. Now, the last step is the optimization itself. And here I have few other tips that I would like to share with you. That when you run your optimization, you need not to forget that it's very important to account for constraints. Because if you leave your optimizer free of any constraints, the likelihood that you obtain a solution that highly departs from your reality is very high. You will find yourself in a situation where what your optimizer says this is the optimal solution is completely different from the reality of the brand. And when you present this to your client, they won't believe you, because what you are given to them is completely different from what they are experiencing. And you are shaking a lot of ground truth here, and you don't want to go down this route. So my advice here is to always make sure that you constrain your mathematical optimal solution with realistic constraints. Go to the media agency, go to a client, try to understand what is the limit of the inventory of every single channel, what is the minimum to put on every single channel, what would be the maximum. It's very, very important that you got this information and you put it in your optimization in order to get realistic results at the end. So this is very, very important. And I have seen some of the drawback of this. I have seen optimization where the agency really wants to provide the optimal solution where you can obtain 20%, 30%, 40% more uplift on your media incremental, but the solution that is proposed is actually not implementable, not actionable. What can you do with a solution that is optimal mathematically but cannot be implemented in the real place? Well, you take it to the media agency and tell you it's impossible for me to apply that allocation that you have told me, because it's something that is not it's not something that we can buy realistically in the marketplace. So that's why it's very, very important to make sure that you add your constraints to your optimization. And the other thing that I want you to consider when you run your optimization is that your optimization output is sensible or sensitive to 3 things: the laydown, the periodicity, and the seasonality index. So if you vary the laydown, if you vary the periodicity, and if you vary seasonality, expect that this will have an impact on your optimization. So, for example, if you look at the laydown, if you use the same laydown as one you have used previously, on the plus side, you will keep close to what your client know, but the solution will be less optimal than when you run your optimization with a free laydown. If you ignore the laydown that has been used in the past, you will obtain a theoretically better laydown, a theoretically better revenue, but bear in mind that what you will obtain into the laydown could be departing too much from what your client is used to, and you need to manage expectations here, or to have strong argument to convince them to really shake everything and change it dramatically. So again, here I think it is a trade-off between what you want to do at that stage, as long as you are aware of the pros and cons of keeping the same night down, ignoring it completely, or use a hybrid solution where you keep some of it and you change some of it at the margin. The second parameter that has an influence on your optimization is the periodicity. Bear in mind that if you run a monthly optimization, month on month, you will obtain different results from when you run an annual optimization. Because on the monthly optimization, say for example, I have 3 channels, then in a way you are looking at optimizing over 3 times 12, 36 kind of components. Whereas when you run an annual optimization in the context of 3 channels, you are looking for 3 components. Obviously, the monthly optimization gives you more freeway, gives you better theoretical revenue increment, but again, it could depart from what is expected, or what has been seen in reality. So this is again another trade-off that you need to make between what resembles what I have seen in the past, that doesn't depart much from what I have seen in the past, and what I have, and how much more I can improve the performance of my client budget. And the third one is obviously seasonality. Sometimes we know that there is some seasonality related to the data or to the media spend and so forth, and we want to give that seasonality a weight in a way that your optimizer will assign more spend to the channels where we have a small spend seasonality and so forth. This is something, another layer that could also change the results of your optimization. So my final tips for this webinar is, and I think this is probably the best tip that I can leave you with, is to perform modeling and optimization iteratively. So please do not think that it is a sequence, meaning that let me finish my model, let me make sure my contribution, my layered chart, my ROI is good, and then after that I will have to worry about optimization. It doesn't work like that. You really need to always keep an eye on your optimization. And that's exactly what I say here, is that in the measurement stage, you need to make sure that you pick up the right variable transformation. We mentioned the decay, we mentioned, or the ad stock, we mentioned the emission returns, and we mentioned that you need to reduce the subset of right curves. And then after that, you always need to iterate between your modeling and your optimization. As you are creating your ROI, you need to see what's the shape of your curve. You need to see, and you run your optimization. If I run my optimization now, with the model I have now, what type of allocation of the budget I will obtain? Does it make sense? And please do sign off your model once both your model results and optimization make sense. So again, make sure that both your optimization and model results make sense before you sign off your model. The other thing that I want, again, that I learned the hard way, is that when you present some results to your clients, again, some rule of thumb, and it's up to you to decide on 20%, 25%, 35%. But what I generally try to do is to not recommend to move away more than 20% and 25% from the current spend. Because these diminishing return curves, some of it is based on my training set, on what I have seen historically, but the rest of the curve is based on an observed data that I don't have historically. So it's all kind of a guess, but it's a smart guess. So that's why when we try to reallocate the budget, I try to put constraints in my optimization where I wouldn't put more than 20%, 25% plus or minus in every single channel. So I keep things within the training data that I have in my model. And also into the laydown, I try to keep some shape of the laydown that has been used historically, because this is where my experience lay. This is the truth that I have. Whereas if I move dramatically from the laydown that has been used, then I enter areas of uncertainty that will increase my prediction error, which nobody wants to get into that stage. So this is it really from me, from this webinar. My final note is to say that optimization is one of the most important part of your MMM model, because it really shifts you from the area where you present results to the area where you present recommendations and insightful things that could be actioned by your client. The models lead you to actionable recommendation on how to make marketing activities more effective and optimize your return on investment. The backbone of any marketing mix modeling project and any optimization is your diminishing return curves. So you really need to make sure that you apply all the due diligence needed in order to pick up the right diminishing return curves. And please remember that your ROI is not necessarily the only indicator that will tell you where to place your budget. Consider the level of marginal returns of every single channel in order to allocate your budget. And please follow the 5 steps that I have recommended. First, account for your carryover. Second, account for saturation. Third, display your diminishing return curves and reduce the subset. Fourth, use some kind of automatic genetic algorithm in order to choose the best curve. Fourth, please make sure that your optimization is actionable and insightful, because you are making it closer to reality by listening to your client, by listening to the media agency, and incorporating those constraints, both in terms of media spend, min-max, and lay down into the results of your optimization. Thank you very much for your attention. That's it from me today, and we can open now the Q&A session.
Thank you, Ramla. Thank you very much for such an insightful presentation. Now, as you said, we're going to jump to our Q&A session, and we have great questions from our attendees. However, due to time, we may not be able to answer all of them, but we will be sure to get back to you with the answers via a blog post or email. So rest assured, we will answer all the questions. So the first question is from Juan. Juan is asking, when generating ROI contribution curves, is the revenue/response variable transformed and takes ad stock into account? So we have the question up on the screen.
Okay, so when you generate a ROI contribution curve, is the revenue response variable transformed and takes ad stock into account. So if I understood well your question, so it depends on whether or not you have applied a prior transformation to your variable. So if, for example, you are modeling display and you are using impressions for display, and you have first created a carryover for your impressions, and then after that, to the carryover, you have applied diminishing returns, or even you take your impressions and you apply diminishing returns to them. Then after that, when you compute your ROI or your contribution curves, you will have the shape that you have. However, if you only apply ad stock, you won't have the curvature that I showed you earlier on. What gives you that nice curvature is actually the saturation curves, like the exponential, the arctangent, and so forth. However, the ad stock, as I mentioned, is a linear transformation. It just takes one linear variable, transform it in a better way, but still linear. Okay, so it doesn't give you that coverage. So please make sure that if you want to run optimization, to apply a saturation function to your whatever variable you are using, and that saturation function could be, for example, one of the functions that I have mentioned earlier on.
Wonderful.
Questions, Juan Carlos.
So the next question is from Nupur. I hope I said that correctly. How do you decide the size of the increments? What does master use as size of the increments in the optimize module?
So here, I think I don't want to focus on master specifically, but any sound optimization software will give you the freedom in a way to choose the increment. Because obviously, the smaller the increment you choose to create your curve, the more accurate you get, but the more time consuming your algorithm will get to converge. So it's really a trade-off between time and accuracy. Some solutions are better off obtained when you go for a high increments, because that level of accuracy is not that important. Some other problem, it requires a smaller increment because accuracy is really, really important, and really you want to make sure that the increments are as small as possible. So again, the software that you use should give you the freedom to decide on the increment, because generally, obviously in my example, I wanted to be academic example, so I took like 10 and then 20 and then 20, but this is really academic example. In real life, the increments are much less than that, and it really depends on your algorithm. And please make sure that you use something that gives you like hands on the increment that you can decide on, and the increments will depend on the use case. Sometimes if you don't know because you don't have enough experience, go with a test and learn approach. Use small increments, look at the solution, then enlarge a little bit the increment and see the solution, and appreciate which one you think is better suited for your business case.
Thank you, Ramla. So the next question is from Steven. Steven asking, the media cost per unit is changing period on period. How can this be taken into consideration while looking for the optimal allocation?
That's a very good one. So here, that's a typical example where you can use the seasonality index in order to force your algorithm put more money on specific months or specific period than the other one. So if you are experiencing, for example, weeks or months or periods of the year where you know that there is a high cost index for your media, that's where you include that cost index in your optimization. So it will tend to lessen the amount of investment that is put on that particular month. However, for months where the cost index is lower, that's where you want to push your algorithm to put more money, because you wanna benefit from the periods where you are experiencing, or the market is experiencing lower spend. So this is a good example on how you can use your seasonality index or your optimization in order to force high investment in low cost months and smaller investment in high cost months.
Lovely, lovely. So Alicia is asking, could you please describe technically how the DR curve is constructed based on the model results?
So this is a technical question, and I would say that here I think that's where your lay down enter into place, because for me, because what we have in a marketing mix model product is a series of weeks, and we have investment in each week. And hopefully, when you look at a window of 3 years, we will see that during those 3 years, we have different amounts of investment. And we'll try to understand that if, for example, certain weeks in certain years, I have 30%, 40% more, what would be the reaction of my sales? So this is the data I have. But from that data, I need to construct something that looks like the curve that I have showed earlier on, where you have spend in the x-axis, and you have revenue or incremental revenue on your y-axis. The way to do it is that, for example, in your spend axis, you say, this is my actual spend. And my actual spend for the last 1 year, for example, because I want to construct a diminishing return curve for 1 year, is split as follows. I don't know, 100, 100, and then 0 for many periods, and then another 100. So this is the way the media is laid down. So in order to construct your curve, you say, okay, look, let me see what I will predict for double of the spend. The way to do it is that week on week, you go and the double spend of that week, 100 becomes 200. Second week, the 100 becomes another 200, then 0, 0, 0, 0, and then 100 becomes 200. Now, after that, these 200, 200, 0, 0, 0, 200 vector, you use the same transformation that you have used in your model, the same add stock transformation, the same saturation parameter, and you apply to that amount of row variable. And then once you do that, you do the computation, you sum that for all that here, and that will give you the second point on the curve. The third point in the curve would be what happens, or what will be my incremental revenue when I triple my spend. In that case, you go back and you say 100 times 3, 100 times 3, so 300, 300, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then 300. Now let me apply first the add stock that I have chosen in my model. Second, the saturation parameter that has been ended up in my model, and do the same thing, and then sum up everything, and that will give me the third point in my curve. And then go an actual, double, 3 will give you that nice C or S-shaped curve, depending on what functional form you have used, that you can easily ingest in any optimization software in order to run your optimization.
Thank you, Ramla. Let me move on to the next question from Aditya. Aditya is asking, what kind of tests do you recommend to select the best decay rate?
Okay, so that's a very good one. And here I think it's not about, because at the end of the day, This is a marketing mix model. So you have your media decays, but you have other variables in your model. You have your economy, you have your COVID, you have your promotions, you have your pricing, etc., etc. So you need to find a way that tells you what is the best decay curve, meaning what is the best decay rate for your context. And your context includes COVID, includes macroeconomic factor, includes marketing, etc., etc. So that's why I insisted on the importance of using some kind of automated algorithm, like for example, genetic algorithm that will say, okay, given all the variables that I have generated in my MMM project, be it DK or marketing or external or competitor, what is the best DK given all the variables that I have already in my equation, will give me the best R square, the best Durbin Watson, and the best statistic. So you can design a functional form to optimize. Say, for example, what I want to optimize in this project is R square, Durbin Watson, fifth statistic, and T-stat. So you compose a functional form or objective function composed of that. And again, this is something that you can easily obtain in the very sophisticated software. For example, in the software master, we have this. So you define your objective function, and then the algorithm will go for all the decays that you have created alongside all the other marketing and macro variable that you have created, and we try to find out the best decay variable for each media channel you have chosen that gives you the best R square, Durbin Watson, with statistic, anti-stat for every single channel.
Thank you very much, Ramla. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we can no longer take more questions. However, as I said, do not worry. We will be sure to answer all of them and share the answers with you. So thank you again, Ramla, for such a wonderful presentation and such an insightful presentation. And a big thank you to our audience as well for attending and asking great questions. For those who could not make it to today's webinar or had to leave mid-webinar, the recording will be on our website. And we will also be sure to send the presentation that Ramla presented to you guys. And we apologize for the technical issues that we had while uploading the presentation on the platform. So we will make sure to share it with you. And thank you once again, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming webinars. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
Ramla.
you.